Imagine placing like a soft hydrogel between two grinding pieces of heavy machinery,
Right.
and then you just slam a heavyweight right on top of it.
Sounds like a terrible idea.
Right. And you're expecting that gel to just, hold a perfect plump shape without squirting out the sides?
Which is, under normal physical laws, that gel should absolutely crush or
Yeah.
splinter or just squeeze right out of the intended area.
Exactly. But biomechanically speaking, that is exactly what happens when dermal fillers are injected into the pelvic region.
Yeah, it's a guaranteed recipe for failure if you don't know the science behind it.
Which brings us to the really fascinating paradox we are exploring today. When dermal fillers, and specifically we're talking about hyaluronic acid gels here, when they're injected into the labia majora for tissue rejuvenation, why doesn't gravity just, take over?
That is the big question.
Because if you combine the relentless downward pull of gravity with the intense, constant pressure of sitting down, and then you add the friction of walking on top of that, common sense says that filler gel should just be pushed straight down into the groin folds or the perineum. But it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. And the fact that it stays put is honestly a minor miracle of medical engineering.
Yeah.
We are looking at a space where the biological structures of the human body have to perfectly interface with laboratory-designed physics.
So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out exactly how this procedure defies both gravity and friction and what structural properties actually prevent that gel from migrating.
Look at a complex puzzle.
Very. And we are working with an incredibly dense, fascinating stack of sources for you today. We're pulling from clinical abstracts that were presented at the 2019 FACETAL conference.
Excellent data in those.
Yeah, totally. Plus some highly detailed medical articles breaking down the rheology, which, if you don't know, is the physics of how liquids and gels flow, and some very specific advanced pelvic anatomy guides.
You really need all three of those pieces to get the full picture.
You do. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because we can't really talk about how the gel survives until we truly understand what it's up against, right?
Right. To appreciate the solution, we have to respect the sheer violence of the environment.
Violence is a good word for it.
It really is. The labia majora are subjected to an intense, constant interplay of mechanical forces that, frankly, most other parts of the human body simply do not experience.
Right.
Any biomaterial implanted here is walking into a remarkably hostile biomechanical war zone. It's fighting two primary competing forces all day, every day.
And the first one the sources mention is lateral shear, which, just visualizing that, I'm picturing the friction and like the stretching that happens when tissue rapidly glides over tissue.
Yes, the mechanical strain of that cannot be overstated. Think about the motion of walking or running or sexual activity.
It's a lot of movement.
A ton. You are dealing with repetitive side-to-side and front-to-back sliding motions.
Right.
And that lateral shear creates heat and kinetic energy that naturally just wants to tear weak molecular bonds apart.
Wow. And that is just force number one.
Exactly. Layered directly on top of that, you have vertical compression.
Which is the heavy perpendicular pressure of sitting.
Yes.
Which, when you actually think about the physics of sitting, it's wild. You are putting a huge percentage of your entire body weight directly onto just a few square inches of tissue.
It's a massive localized load.
Right. And the 2019 FACE conference abstracts actually looked at the simulated pressure loads here. They were testing these gels against forces exceeding 2 to 3 pounds per square inch of pure downward compression.
Which is an immense load for a water-based gel to bear without just bursting.
Totally.
And the clinical reality gets even more complex when we look at the chemical nature of the filler itself.
Right, because hyaluronic acid, or HA, which is the gold standard material used for these dermal fillers, is hydrophilic.
Meaning it loves water.
Exactly. It actively attracts and binds water molecules to itself. And as I was reading an article by Dr. Poucher in our stack, I realized how much this complicates the whole procedure.
Oh, it complicates things tremendously.
She explicitly warns that this water-loving nature means normal, everyday physiological changes can turn that area into like a high-pressure zone.
Because the human body is never static.
Yeah.
If a patient's internal environment shifts, the filler is going to react to that shift immediately.
Right. Dr. Poucher points out that if a patient just eats a really salty meal, or they are going through the premenstrual phase of their cycle, the body naturally retains systemic water.
And the HA filler acts exactly like a sponge.
Pulling all that extra fluid in, which causes the vulvar tissue to swell. And that swelling drastically increases the internal tissue pressure.
It's fighting for space.
Yes. So going back to that heavy machinery analogy, our imaginary hydrogel isn't just being squeezed and ground down by the pelvis and the chair, it's also inflating itself from the inside out, fighting against the walls of the skin.
This raises an important question. With all of that internal swelling pushing outward and the lateral friction tearing side to side and the downward gravitational compression crushing from above, how does this gel not just squeeze right out of place and migrate down the inner thighs?
Right, it really feels like it should just flatten out like a pancake or slide straight down the legs.
It would. It would
Yeah.
completely fail and migrate if it weren't for a highly specialized two-part defense system.
Okay, let's get into that.
The success of this relies on the body's natural anatomical fences, working in perfect tandem with the structural physics engineered into the gel itself.
I want to dig into those biological fences first, because the pelvic anatomy guides in our sources paint a picture of a really complex fortress down there.
It is incredibly complex.
If we look beneath the skin of the labia majora, these longitudinal folds extending from the mons pubis down to the perineum, we find a mix of adipose tissue, which is fat, along with connective tissue.
There is also a very specific smooth muscle layer called the tunica dartos.
Right, I saw that.
Interestingly, this muscle responds to temperature changes, contracting when cold and relaxing when warm, which just adds yet another layer of dynamic movement the filler has to survive.
Geez. But the true unsung heroes preventing downward and lateral filler migration are the fascial layers.
Absolutely.
Because I used to think of fascia as just like a biological saran wrap that coated the muscles, but reading these anatomical breakdowns, that doesn't do it justice at all, does it?
Not at all. Reducing fascia to just a wrapping completely ignores its load-bearing capabilities.
Right.
Fascia is a robust band of connective tissue, primarily made of dense collagen fibers. It attaches, stabilizes, encloses, and separates muscles and internal organs.
So it's strong.
Very strong. In the labia majora, the superficial fat is contained within a lighter layer called Camper's fascia, but the critical boundary, the one doing the heavy lifting here, is underneath that.
The callus fascia.
Yes, it's a much thicker, more fibrous layer.
And the sources mention that the callus fascia actually corresponds to scarpus fascia in the abdomen, right? Like it's a continuous structure that just changes names as it moves down the body.
Exactly. That continuity is vital for surgical and aesthetic mapping. The callus fascia is the key to our entire mystery, and its power comes entirely from where it physically anchors to the human skeleton and the surrounding dense tissues.
So instead of thinking about it as a saran wrap, the callus fascia acts less like a wrapper and more like a reinforced canvas hammock that's bolted directly into the pelvic bone, creating a hard stop that nothing can fall through.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it. It is a highly engineered, load-bearing hammock.
Wow.
If you map out the attachments, inferiorly, meaning at the absolute bottom, the callus fascia is anchored tightly to the ischiopubic rami.
Which, if you're sitting in a hard chair right now listening to this, you can actually feel the ischiopubic rami. Those are the hard pelvic bones directly beneath you taking your weight.
Yes, the body essentially nails this fascial pouch right to those bones.
Yeah.
And posteriorly, toward the back of the body, it attaches securely to the urogenital diaphragm.
Which the anatomical guides also call the perineal membrane, right?
Correct.
When I was looking at the diagrams, the urogenital diaphragm basically looks like a thick, muscular trampoline forming the entire base of your pelvis.
It seals the floor completely.
Yeah.
But clinically speaking, the most fascinating part of the callus fascia is actually where it does not attach.
Oh.
It lacks an anterior attachment, meaning it isn't sealed at the top, toward the belly.
I saw a really wild clinical anecdote about that in the sources.
The hematoma spread.
Yes. Because it isn't sealed at the top, if a patient develops an infection or a severe hematoma like bad bleed in the labia majora, that fluid can actually travel upward and spread into the anterior abdominal wall right up toward the stomach.
Because fluid will always follow the path of least resistance. Since the top is open, the fluid escapes upward.
That is crazy.
But because of those firm inferior attachments to the bone and the posterior attachments to the perineal membrane, fluid absolutely cannot spread downward into the thigh or groin folds.
Right.
And it cannot spread backward into the perineum.
So it creates an impenetrable biological dam at the bottom.
Exactly.
When a practitioner injects filler, even with gravity pulling down all day and the weight of sitting pushing down, the gel hits that callus fascia hammock and just stops. It physically cannot fall any further.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it shows how the external genitalia and these deep fascial boundaries, work as one incredibly advanced functional unit.
Yeah.
The body has built a structural anchored floor that supports the heavy pelvic organs from the inside, while simultaneously limiting external migration on the outside.
Okay, so the callus fascia provides an impenetrable biological floor. We have the container figured out.
We do.
But even if you have a perfectly sealed bowl, if you pour water into it, it's still going to pool into a heavy, flat puddle at the bottom. Anatomy alone can't hold a shape. So how does the filler fight back and maintain that rejuvenation?
Because a pure liquid would simply sink to the floor of the callus fascia and stay there, creating a heavy, unnatural lump at the bottom of the tissue.
Which nobody wants.
No. To prevent that, the filler has to possess very specific structural mechanics of its own.
Which brings us to the physics of the filler gel itself. And the medical articles in our stack dive really deep into a field of science called rheology.
Rheology is fascinating.
I had to read this section a few times, honestly, but it is super interesting.
Rheology is the study of how matter flows and how it deforms under stress.
Yeah.
It is the absolute backbone of aesthetic medicine.
Okay.
When we talk about hyaluronic acid dermal fillers, we have to completely throw out the standard definitions of liquid and solid.
Right, because the sources use the term viscoelastic. To get a grip on this, I loved the analogy used in one of the rheology papers. If you think about purely viscous materials like honey, if you push on honey or pour it onto a table, it deforms, it flows outward, and it never snaps back to its original shape.
Exactly. It permanently yields to the stress and loses the kinetic energy you put into it.
Right. But on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, you have purely elastic materials, like a rubber band. You pull a rubber band, it deforms, but the second you let go, it stores that energy and uses it to snap right back to its exact original shape.
Hyaluronic acid fillers are hydrogels, which are complex polymer networks swollen with water. And because they're viscoelastic, they exhibit both of those properties simultaneously.
That's so cool.
They can flow like a highly viscous liquid under certain pressures, but they rebound like a soft, elastic solid under others.
So I saw these two terms repeated constantly in the rheology sources, G' and cohesivity.
The two most important metrics.
I get that they generally mean firmness and stickiness, but how do these two specific metrics actually fight gravity and pressure in the body?
Well, they are the specific defenses against the two hostile forces we discussed earlier. Let's look at G' first, which is also known as the elastic modulus.
Okay.
This is the scientific measure of the gel's firmness and its ability to resist lateral shear stress.
So the gliding and friction from walking that wants to smear the gel sideways.
Precisely. When the labial tissue glides over a filler with a high G', the gel will deform slightly under the friction.
Because it's soft.
Right. But because of that high elasticity, it acts exactly like a microscopic spring. It absorbs the kinetic energy of walking and immediately bounces right back into its three-dimensional shape.
So it provides structural lift and aggressively resists being smeared or elongated laterally.
Exactly.
But a high G' alone wouldn't be enough to survive sitting down.
No, it wouldn't.
Because you can have something really firm, like a piece of hard plastic, that just shatters or splits when you drop a heavy weight on it.
And that is where cohesivity becomes the ultimate deciding factor.
Got it.
Cohesivity is the internal adhesion force that holds the cross-linked hyaluronic acid polymer chains together.
Yeah.
It is a literal measure of how well the gel sticks to itself under duress.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The 2019 FACE conference data highlighted that cohesivity is the specific property that resists vertical compression.
Yes.
When you sit down, you apply massive vertical force onto the labia majora. If the gel had low cohesivity, it wouldn't just flatten out slightly.
It's far worse than just flattening out.
Yeah.
Under the weight of the human body, a low cohesivity gel would literally physically shatter.
Wow.
The molecular bonds would break, causing the gel deposit to separate into microparticles, or it would forcefully squish outward, spreading into a microscopic thin layer across the entire anatomical space.
It would just pancake across the callus fascia.
Exactly.
And the clinical data showed that fillers with lower cohesivity migrated in 100% of their simulated high compression models. Like they just couldn't handle the weight of a sitting human.
100% failure rate.
But a filler engineered with highly cohesive properties actively refuses to separate because the bonds are so strong.
Right. The internal molecular bonds are so robust that even under those 2 to 3 pounds per square inch of compressive pelvic force, the gel stays completely intact as a single unified block.
That's amazing.
It won't break apart into smaller pieces, and it fights back against spreading flat.
So if we put this all together, We have a highly cohesive gel that refuses to pancake under the massive pressure of sitting.
Check.
It has a high G prime, so it acts like a spring, bouncing back into shape after the sheer friction of like 10,000 steps a day.
Check.
And all of this intense physics is happening inside a biological canvas hammock, the callus fascia, that is bolted to the pelvic bones, physically blocking anything from migrating downward.
It is a phenomenal marriage of biomaterial engineering capitalizing on natural human anatomy.
It really is. But I have to push back here for a second because reading about how firm and sticky this gel has to be to survive left me with a major mechanical question.
Okay, what is it?
If this gel has a high G prime making it super firm and high cohesivity making it incredibly sticky, how on earth does a practitioner push that dense block of gel through a tiny needle without ruining the molecular bonds?
That is a great question.
And why doesn't it feel like a golf ball once it's inside the patient's tissue?
Well, you are hitting on the most elegant property of hydrogels, which is a phenomenon known as thixotropy.
Thixotropy. Okay, I saw that word in the rheology papers. Walk us through how that actually works.
Thixotropy is a property where a viscoelastic gel physically changes its own viscosity depending on the amount of stress being applied to it.
Wait, really? It changes its own viscosity?
Yes. When the practitioner pushes the plunger on the syringe, they are applying an incredibly concentrated, high shear stress to the gel to force it into the narrow needle or cannula.
They're essentially forcing a thick gel through a tiny tunnel.
Right. Under that specific, intense directional stress, the cross-linked polymer chains within the hyaluronic acid temporarily uncoil and align themselves.
Oh, wow.
The gel essentially drops its G' on demand. It thins out and becomes highly viscous, allowing it to flow smoothly and easily out of the syringe without tearing its own internal structure apart.
But the second it leaves the tip of the needle and enters the body.
The second it enters the expansive space of the tissue, that concentrated shear stress from the syringe is instantly gone.
Right.
The polymer chains immediately recoil and lock back together. The gel instantly regains its high G' and high cohesivity.
That is absolutely wild.
It shapeshifts back into a firm, elastic structural strut that can now bear the weight of sitting and the friction of walking.
It literally shapeshifts to slip through the door and then braces itself against the walls once it's inside.
It's entirely by design.
Incredible.
But we have to factor in the human element here, too.
Yeah.
Even with the perfect viscoelastic gel and the impenetrable anatomical hammock of the callus fascia, the entire procedure will still fail and result in migration if the practitioner doesn't put the gel in the exact right physiological pocket.
Right. Which brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, the actual injection technique.
Yes.
Reading through the clinical abstracts, they were incredibly specific about how this has to be done to avoid disaster. First off, they don't even use a standard needle.
No, they don't.
They specify using an 18-gauge cannula. Why a blunt cannula instead of a sharp needle?
A blunt-tipped cannula is non-negotiable in this area for a few reasons. The labia majora is an incredibly vascular region. It is packed with blood vessels.
Okay, yeah.
A sharp needle slices blindly through tissue, which can easily pierce a vein and cause a severe hematoma, or worse, an intravascular injection. A blunt cannula, on the other hand, gently pushes blood vessels and tissues aside as it navigates.
And I imagine a blunt tip also makes sure you don't accidentally pierce right through that callus fascia hammock we just talked about.
Precisely. It allows the practitioner to feel the tissue resistance and stay exactly in the correct anatomical plane.
Makes sense.
And the abstracts heavily advocate for a technique called linear retrotracing.
Which is where they insert the cannula all the way to the farthest end of the treatment area and then slowly, steadily inject the filler as they pull the cannula backward out of the tissue.
Yes. Instead of leaving a single heavy blob of gel, they are laying down a smooth structural strut of viscoelastic support.
Okay.
But the depth of where they lay that strut is the most critical factor for preventing migration. The sources dictate the gel must be placed deep in the subcutaneous tissue.
Deep sub-Q.
Specifically, sandwiched right between the tunica dartos, smooth muscle fibers, and the fibrous layer of the adipose sac.
Why that exact specific layer? Like, what actually happens mechanically if they inject it too shallow, right up against the tight skin of the dermis?
What's fascinating here is how the tissue architecture forcefully dictates the gel's behavior.
Okay.
If you inject a high G', highly cohesive, expanding hydrogel too superficially into the tight, unyielding layers of the dermis, there simply isn't enough volumetric space for it.
Oh, I see. It's like overinflating a tire.
Exactly. And physics always wins. The filler will follow the path of least resistance. It can't go down, and it can't go up into the tight skin, so it will forcibly migrate laterally, spreading sideways and causing a lumpy, unnatural, distorted appearance.
Yikes. But when placed correctly in that deep plane against the dartos muscle, what happens?
In that deep plane, there is ample spatial capacity for this robust gel to sit comfortably.
Right.
The tunica dartos muscle natively supports and interacts with the hydrogel from above, while the rigid floor of the callus fascia directly supports it from below.
So it's totally cradled.
Yes, it seamlessly integrates with the host tissue, providing broad structural lift without being squeezed sideways.
It really is a masterclass in biomechanics. You can't just rely on one element. You need all of them working together perfectly in 3 dimensions.
Absolutely.
You need the deep anatomical knowledge to find the right tissue plane and rely on those fascial hammocks. You need the rheological science to engineer a highly cohesive, high G-prime viscoelastic gel that won't shatter under pressure. And you need the technical skill to utilize thixotropy, laying down structural struts via a blunt cannula.
It completely demystifies the procedure, proving that there is rigorous, load-bearing physics and deep anatomical strategy behind every single choice a practitioner makes.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? It means that aesthetic medicine is so much more than just a surface-level cosmetic fix.
Way more.
It is highly advanced materials, science, and biomechanical engineering working in tandem with human biology. When you understand the why and the how behind these procedures, why a specific gel is chosen to fight shear stress, how the fascia acts as a bolted floor, it makes you a far more informed patient or learner.
Definitely.
You aren't just blindly trusting a process, you understand the hidden mechanics, keeping everything exactly where it belongs.
And it proves that with enough targeted engineering, we can actually outsmart gravity and friction within the human body, at least temporarily.
Yeah.
Which leads to a really compelling thought about the future of medicine as a whole.
Ooh, I love where this is going.
If we now possess the technology to engineer hydrogels that can perfectly mimic, integrate with, and withstand the highly dynamic, high-friction, high-compression forces of the pelvic floor, where else can we apply this exact same physics?
Oh, that is a great point. The pelvis isn't the
Highly dynamic, structurally complex areas.
like joints.
Exactly. Think about the major joints, like knees, that suffer from severe cartilage loss over time, or the spinal discs in our backs that constantly compress, bulge, and degrade under the weight of our own bodies.
Right.
Those are areas subjected to immense, relentless gravity and extreme lateral shear.
It really makes you wonder if, in the very near future, we might be structurally restoring worn-out knee cartilage or repairing herniated spinal discs with simple, non-surgical injections of tailor-made, highly cohesive viscoelastic gels.
Using the exact same rheological principles we've unpacked today,
Wow.
the underlying physics remain exactly the same. The human body is just a series of varied mechanical environments waiting for the precisely engineered biomaterial to restore them.
That is definitely something to mull over next time you drop an apple, or just sit down in a hard chair and think about the gravity pulling on you.
For sure.
It might be a relentless universal force, but as we've learned today, with a bolted biological dam and a cleverly engineered hydrogel, we can absolutely hold the line. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the hidden mechanics of the world around you, and we'll catch you next time.